Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Mind Your Business Show. I am your host, Milt Walker, joined today by none other than himself, the private money godfather, Tony Calloway. How are you today, sir?
Maestro, I am fantastic, man. Here we are, December, the last month of the year, getting ready for Christmas. I probably worked off that turkey I ate, last week.
Right. Time for some more now,
I've
right?
been working hard at it, man. But hey, I'm feeling great on this beautiful, glorious morning here in Columbus, Georgia. Folks, I keep talking about this beautiful city that Milt and I live in. And, I tell you, the Chattahoochee River, we have people come here from all over the world to do whitewater rafting. We have the home of the infantry, or actually the maneuver center now, where they've joined the armor and the infantry school here at Fort Benning, Georgia. National Infantry Museum, Civil War Naval Museum. I mean, I could go on and on. But there's a lot to see and do. Coca-Cola Space Science. Man, we got all kind of great stuff
We do. We
here.
really do.
Have two Fortune 500 companies, actually two Fortune 100 companies headquartered here. Nobody knows about. And we don't have traffic like Atlanta. So I'm just saying, y'all got to come check out Columbus, Georgia. But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful fall day here in Columbus. So I thank you all for making the Mind Your Business show an important part of your Saturday and an important part of your life. And today we're going to have part two, since we kind of had an abrupt end to our show yesterday, not yesterday or last
Week,
Saturday.
yeah.
So we're going to let the Maestro keep talking to you guys about technology, how it's changing our lives, improving our lives and opportunities in business. So I really want to ask everybody who's tuning in live to please, any questions you have about anything about, how to set your computer up, which one should you buy, smartphone, I don't know, whatever it is that's technology related. You got a man who knows it all. Been there, done that, So Maestro, I'm glad to have you back again to, finish sharing some of the great things, because you and I have all kind of technology conversations. As old gospel says, you brought me from a mighty long way. Uh, so we want to bring some other people along too. So we'll let you, if you would, because again, some of you may not have seen last episode or have had the privilege of getting to know a little bit about his background. If you could keep it to about 2 minutes and just kind of give everybody a sense of, your acumen, so that they can really know that, hey, this is somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Absolutely. And in the great tradition of our show, I'm gonna give a shout out to the people who are the early birds that's here to get the worms. And we got Ebony here. She says, "Good morning, fellas. Great Saturday." Edwin Winton is joining us, saying good morning. And everybody else is just watching. I'm glad, and I appreciate everybody for tuning back in to hear part two of this. And yeah, so for me, I started off in the community. I started off in the community, helping people, just because that's what I love to do. And over time, it became apparent that this was part of my calling and my purpose. And so I started to pursue that. And as I grew and as I continued down my path, I met a lot of great people that helped me, that taught me a lot of things. I've been in management. I've helped raise the sales in retail by $1 million in a year. So I've gotten like some really great experience and as you said, business acumen, just in general, being able to look at the numbers, being able to track inventory, being able to respond to customers, being able to keep the environment of a team in a positive way so that it can impact, have a great impact for the store. I've done consultancies with the state of Georgia, which was an awesome experience. It gave me a lot of great project management experience, even though I've had a project management experience from before when I was doing fire alarm systems and camera systems, and that was also with some government contracts. But this was a very special experience for me because it was just me, and it was a path that was actually an exploratory path. There was nobody who was there before, and so I had to actually lead in this position.
So
And
you were a
so
trailblazer, in other words.
I was a trailblazer, and so I got a chance to work with a lot of great government officials, and to help keep Georgians safe, and to make sure that the educational programs were delivered in an efficient way, and just all types of great experience. And then on to working with you, right? Like working with you has been a great experience as well, and
Well,
and
thank
with
you.
the private money syndicate. I learned a lot from you guys day in, day out. That's why I'm here every every week to let people know what we're doing, and to get as many people on board as possible. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
All right, all right. Now throw in your work with Google and a few other things. I think
Yeah.
Dell and out there on the West Coast.
Yeah, AT&T, yeah.
Yeah.
And getting certifications, going to their events. I got invited to a private event where they were opening and this is Google, where they were opening the data center that they had just built in Los Angeles. And so I got a chance to kind of get front row seats into the technology that was going to help change the way the city of Los Angeles managed their city. So
Wow.
a lot of systems they used, including traffic systems and stuff like that, were moved into that database. I mean that to that data center, and improved. Right. So that's the key. It's not
There you
just
go.
about using the technology. It has to be some kind of improvement. You don't
Exactly.
just you don't just want to have it. You want to actually have it work for
Yeah.
you. And that's
And that's the focus of our continued conversation today. And I think serendipitously, that's a great segue to now. If you think about this, everybody, when we think of a technology, we're thinking of something new, but ultimately technologies become just part of our day to day. We don't we take them for granted because they
right.
just become part of the. Once upon a time, fire was a technology. I mean,
Right,
the
right.
wheel.
Being able to make fire, right? Like,
So these things that we're talking about, the key thing is you have to use them. And Milt just used the point. I made the point that it should be an improvement. So we want to ask you, what things, because until you cognitively understand something, you can't necessarily use it. Because I teach college, and I tell my students that teaching is one thing, learning is one thing, understanding is the most important thing. Because until you
absolutely.
understand something, it's just it's inert. You can't
Yeah,
necessarily apply it
yeah,
to much of anything. So
right.
we want to help you to get some understanding today. That's the point. So if you have questions as you view live, please put those in the chat. We'll make sure that we address them. So before I go into the next part of our discussion, Maestro, did anybody else tune in that we want to acknowledge this morning?
Yeah, Horace Solomon is joining us today. He says, "Good morning,
Oh
welcome
boy, from
back,
Mobile,
Horace."
Georgia.
Yeah, welcome back, man. And definitely anybody who's watching this, remember we have this 10,000 Dreams Challenge, and we still have space to help make your dreams come true by giving you all the support that you need to start your business or your real estate venture. So make sure y'all go to our website so that you guys can sign up for that. Okay, and tell a friend to tell a friend. Okay,
Amen.
that's what we
That's
want to
right.
say.
That's right. All right, so we're going to kick this thing off. All right, so let's talk about the folks who are working from home, as say entrepreneurial home-based businesses and things like that. uh let's just say, and plus we're going into the end of the year, first of the year, folks going to be getting those income tax refund checks and
Right.
all that other good stuff. So help me to understand, if somebody will help us to understand, somebody setting up a home-based operation, what are some of the key things that they should be thinking about in terms of equipment and technology infrastructure that might relate to the typical home-based business, which obviously might be service related. So with that as a basis to start talking, where do we go from here?
Yeah, so there's a couple. You mentioned a couple of things, right? Starting a home-based business, and just having a remote worker, position, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a remote worker position, there are a few things that you can do to help protect yourself. Typically, they're gonna help you with that, like whatever company that you're working for, they typically send you what you need, but sometimes they don't. So if you don't have these things, then you definitely want to make sure you invest in getting these things. You want to have a high quality headset for communication. You want to have a security software on your computer, because when you start to get into this realm, and some of this stuff is ideal for both ends of the spectrum. You become a target. You can become a target. So you really want to start taking your security seriously, because what happens is the technology that we use to protect ourselves is also mirrored by the technology that people are using to take advantage of people. So that's advancing just as fast as the technology to actually protect you. So you definitely want to make sure that you're taking all the steps that you can. Make sure you keep your devices updated. If you don't know how to do any of these things, contact Silver Lining Consulting LLC, and we can help you with all of this. But if you don't know, because it's a lot to it, but there's simple steps that you can take that can actually save you a lot of headache down the road.
Right.
But when it comes to you starting your home based business, right? That's like I said, as I mentioned before, the company actually handles a lot of that stuff for you on their end if you're becoming a worker. But when it comes to you starting your own business,
Right.
you're responsible for 360 degrees of your business. So you want to make sure that, again, starting off with the same things, make sure you have a high quality headset or microphone, and that's going to enable you to have to take advantage of this instant communication network that we have called the internet, and utilizing software like, Google Meet that we're on right now, or any other meeting software that you may prefer. But again, and you want to have security, right? And when it comes to, the security of your information, right, as a business owner, that is so critical in today's day and age, because we know that information is valuable. We know that it can make us wealthy. We know that it can enrich our lives in so many different ways. Well, the bad guys know that too. So they're looking for that same information so that they can use it against you, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so you want to be secure. You want to have all the security that you need, and really you want to have a good assessment by a professional. If you don't have this knowledge yourself, that can help you to see where your vulnerabilities are. You
Yeah.
want to see where that is, because if you don't know where it is, then you just open and you're out there, and it's you're really playing Russian roulette. You don't really know what's coming next, so it could be hit or miss. So you
Yeah.
definitely want to make sure you can do that.
Yeah, well, let me throw a plug in for Silver Lining Consulting. We have the security platform that the Maestro recommended for us, and I remember it was like it was either the day after or the evening after the morning that we put it on there. It's like I started getting these warnings about folks trying to hack
Right,
hack my computer, and it's like otherwise, I
right,
don't know, they
right,
would have gotten, but they didn't get it. So
right, right.
oftentimes there are these things that are lurking that we have no knowledge of. And
Yeah,
the point we're making now, if you're making this launch into business, which I encourage everybody, I mean, the hustle mentality is alive and well, because all the tools are now available for people to pursue their dreams. And that's what we're about here at the Private Money Syndicate. Mind Your Business shows we want to power your dreams, not only with money, but we also want to power it with knowledge and information. All right, now certain things are just coming to mind. So just give me some short answers on these. And now a lot of people are always pondering, okay, I got a couple of grand or whatever. Do I get a laptop or do I get a desktop? And again, we're talking about a home-based entrepreneur. So, give us your opinion, and obviously base it on something that's just, the fundamental. I got to go this way or that way. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and again, I started off on the hardware side of this. I build when I do have a desktop, I build my desktops from the ground up. I build them for other people, customize them, so on and so forth. So definitely, there's a place for both, right? So when you're doing a home based business, you got to ask yourself, like, first of all, what am I doing, right? So it would really depend. So a desktop has capacity to have a lot more performance than a desktop. I mean, than a laptop, right? So you can get a lot more power if you have a desktop. So if you're doing tasks such as video editing or photo editing or any type of creative type of 3D CAD drawings, or whatever you're doing, if you're using like very PC intensive type tasks, then you definitely want to go with a desktop. And the reason why that is because it first of all, you can upgrade it. It's easier to upgrade. A lot of laptops, even though they're coming out with some now that you can actually upgrade pretty easily as well. But with a desktop, it's a lot easier to upgrade, right? Typically, the parts are a lot cheaper in the whole scheme of things. And so you can actually get, because what people, I always tell my customers this, especially when I'm doing custom jobs like that, what we see is the name, the brand of the computer. That's what we see as just a consumer. But what you don't know is a lot of those PC components are from the same manufacturers. They're all the same on the inside.
Just a different shell.
There may be a little bit, differences and stuff like that, but ultimately from an average standpoint, they're all the same. So when you look at it in that perspective, that that you can find competition, and you can find cheaper PC parts or components that actually still do exactly the same thing without quote unquote brand name. That's why when you go to certain manufacturers' websites, you look at their PC components, and it's a lot higher than what you could probably buy it for on any of the other online stores and stuff like that. And that's why, because you're really paying for the brand. You're not really, so when it comes to that, you definitely, if it's something where you think that, hey, I want high customization, I want to be able to upgrade, I want to be able to, because like I'll just give you, for instance, like my desktop PC, I have 32 gigabytes of RAM. On my laptop, I got 16. So that enables so in other words, my desktop can go a whole lot faster than my laptop can go.
Okay.
Just from that perspective. And it's still upgradable. I can go up to, I think, about 128 gigabytes of RAM on my, but I have like about 5 terabytes of hard drive space, and the capacity for that is, it's almost unlimited. So, it's, so it's one of those things like, you can't get that from a laptop.
Yes.
But if it's something that you can do, like productivity work or things of that nature, they have high performance laptops as well. But what you have to understand is, those are going to be your more expensive laptops. Those are going to be the laptops that require a little bit more maintenance as well. Like say for instance, the one I'm using right now, like it's studio quality, so I can use studio quality software and stuff like that. But it gets very hot. So I have to have a space. I have to think of that when I'm using it, because it gets very hot. Your desktop does the same thing, but you have it's got a fan in it, and it has the ability to add fans or even go into something like liquid cooling. You can go into other forms of cooling that will keep it cooler, easier.
Right.
So and some laptops are built like that too. You can get them built like that, but again, those are going to be the ones that cost $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. And from a cost standpoint, if you're just getting into it, a desktop may be better for you, because from the cost to performance ratio, you
Right.
can
Yeah.
get the same performance from a desktop for a cheaper price than you would from a laptop.
Gotcha.
But, and
All
I
right.
just want to make this last point
Go
because
ahead.
this is the most important point in your decision making process. If you ever need to be mobile, if you ever need to be able to take your work with you, then the laptop is always going to be the obvious choice, right? Because that's what's going to enable you to be highly mobile if you need to be on the go, kind of like me. So I have that, that's why I got it, so that I can actually do what I do from anywhere, right? I don't
Gotcha.
have to, so I spent the extra money to be able to do that because I knew that that was part of my business. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And that was the next thing I was going to ask you, what would be the case for the laptop? And you just articulated that as part of that answer. All right. Now, the next thing, and I got a lot of these, so if you can keep your answers concise, but these are things that people don't know and think about because I'm relating to me. All right. I was telling you before we came on camera, at the house, we were discussing internet speed. So from the standpoint of, somebody's going to have a home-based business, just in general, what you would say would be the minimum speed they need on the internet, and any other factors they need to think of in terms of some of those decisions as to, when they're signing up for these, plans, what kind of capacity that they should be wanting to, buy into.
Right. So, and again, it all goes back to the type of business, right? So, if you're streaming a lot of data, just as a general rule, and I'll just use it like that because, that could be anything, right? It could be, like I said, it could be videos, it could be editing, stuff like that. So, if that's the case, if you're streaming a lot of data, then your internet capacity needs to be higher because otherwise it will slow down that process, right? Which uh, it just equals into not efficient, right? So
Mhm.
it makes you not efficient because it slows down your process. And but if all you're doing is productivity work and all you need to do is just, maybe occasionally download a file or two and occasionally upload a file or two to your cloud backup or something like that, and it's not really internet intensive, then you can go with nine times out of 10 you can go with the normal broadband service. But DSL and dial-up are things of the past. You never want to go with those at all anymore because just your normal web browser now streams a lot more data than your DSL connection can really handle. And the reason for that is because the technology behind this stuff has changed.
Mhm.
It's a lot more rich. It's a lot more in depth. So the web is built on more than just HTML and CSS. It's built on languages, coding languages that actually translate into web design, right? So you have these web applications that you run, and again, like I said, if you're streaming a lot of data, and an example of that would be if you're in data analytics, any type of way, whether you're a sales and analyst, or whether you're a financial analyst, or whether you are in IT as a
Mhm.
data analyst, either way, you're streaming a lot of data because you're constantly doing queries and you're constantly accessing information on the internet. And
Right. Right.
and again, since we're talking about home-based businesses, if you have other people on your network, then you need those higher speeds because it's like you got to think about it like a water hose. The bigger the water hose, like if your water hose is just a regular garden hose, then you can only get so that much water through it. But if it's an actual fire hose, right,
Yeah.
that they use to put out the fires, you can get a whole lot more water through that. So the water will represent the data. And so the more data that you need to get through, or you need the capacity to have, the higher your internet speed
Yeah.
needs to be.
So if let's just say, somebody's got kids playing games, you're using the internet for your streaming television, and
Streaming,
then
streaming
I mean
Netflix,
that's a
yeah.
case where you got to think about all those straws that are drawn from the source, and make sure you have enough capacity. So and again, I'm putting you see these different ads for these speeds like 60 megabits, and put that in, go back to your garden hose, fire hose relationship. I mean, from whatever source of marketing the typical consumer is going to be looking at. Here in Columbus, we got MediaCom and a few other providers. What does that mean to me in terms of what I could expect in terms of functionality out of this speed versus that speed, in terms of users. And yeah, I guess you understand what I'm asking. But
I do.
this is the point. Most people see stuff, but they don't have understanding, so they can't make viable use of it. So help us with some understanding there.
Yeah. So, your typical DSL, we'll just go with DSL because dial up is not even a factor, really. DSL does like about 1.5 megabits per second, right? So that's the limit. That's the cap. It won't go higher than that. So that is definitely not something that you want. The challenge that we have here, and it's interesting that you put it that way, talking about Columbus, the challenge we have in Georgia in general is that our network infrastructure is outdated. We don't have the proper infrastructure. They're still building out fiber pipelines for, a lot of this data transmission. So, it's one of those things that, in some areas you may have it, like Columbus, you have some fiber connections in some areas, but not even all over the city, but in places like Atlanta, you got it pretty much all over the city, so, just to show a contrast of what you even have available. But in today's day and age, a gigabyte connection is really a standard. That's really the base standard nowadays because of the same reasons that you just mentioned, because you have multiple, and it's not just that you might have other people, you may have multiple devices connected at the same time. Mm-hmm. You got your phone, you got your laptop, you got your desktop, you got your TVs, you got any of the Internet of Things that you may have in your home, your smart screens, your smart assistants, your smart speakers, all of these things, your smart light bulbs, all kind of stuff, all connected to this connection. If you don't have, if you're still running on a 1.5 megabit connection, you're going to run into some traffic, so it's going to slow it down. Right. So that's just what that means. So you definitely want at least about 20 megabits per second for just normal web browsing, about 40 plus for streaming data, and that's with not a whole lot of devices connected. But the more capacity, the more you add, the more you want to increase it, right? But I said, again, the base standard now, because when you buy, and I'll tell you why that is, when you buy a laptop or you buy a desktop, they come standard with a gigabit Ethernet connection.
Okay.
That's standard. So that's 1,000 megabits per second. So that is the standard for the technology that's inside of your computer, but you're not even using it to its capacity. And sometimes it's based on your location, but other times it's just because we don't know that's what the capacity is. So we're just using what we got,
Well, we're doing it based on price of the bundle or the, whatever, but not necessarily, like I say, having the understanding of, if this is important, I'm going to run a business, then you do have to think about all the other devices. I hadn't thought about the assistants and the phones and all these things, but
exactly.
You got to look at your household and then take all that into consideration. All right, now here's another area. I'm trying to get through these before we run out of time again. Is all right, storage. Now, cloud versus physical device storage capacity. Talk to us about, because we all see these pitches for the cloud, and of course, I appreciate that you've introduced us to the cloud. But when you're looking at the device, do I want to build out, like you said, you got terabytes of storage in a computer versus what you might pay for to have in cloud storage, and the advantages or disadvantages of each?
Exactly. And you hit a great point. So this is how you want to think about it. If you have the hardware storage, and I'm going to start from a very high point, and I'm going to get a little more specific. So from a high point, you got hardware and you got cloud storage, right? Two distinct versions of storage. With your hardware storage, you buy it one time and that's the only investment you make, and it's yours, right? And you can write to it as you will, right? For me, just kind of using an example of what I was talking about my desktop, having, several terabytes of storage inside of the computer. If you deal with a lot of large files like image files, video files, creative files like design files and stuff like that, or if you do have like documents and stuff like that, or if you do have like a lot of programs and stuff like that, that would cause you to need more storage, right? Because that's where all of the information on your computer is stored, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's stored there. Now, the other side of that coin is the cloud storage, and cloud storage is great for all of those things as well. But it really shines in the backup and disaster recovery space, because, and the reason why is because it is an ongoing cost. When we're talking about business, we're talking about, it's an ongoing expense. So you're going to be paying for it monthly. Typically, you could pay for it in longer terms or whatnot, but you use it. It goes by the amount that you're using. So depending on how much you're using, that's what's going to determine the cost. And if that increases, then the cost obviously increases, right? And there's other factors as well, which, the connection being one of them, right? Your network, because you have to have a network to be able to access the cloud, so those are, so that kind of makes that part of it kind of synchronous, where you have
Right.
to have both in order for you to really do what you need to do. And depending on the need of the business, if you need to back up your data daily because you're always changing information on these documents, on these videos, and so on and so forth, then you're going to be pushing a lot of data up and down, a lot. So, you want to take that into consideration again when you marry your cloud storage with your network. And so but it really shines when it comes to backup and disaster recovery, because you put it there for a set term, for a set time, and then it just sits there. So that's all you're gonna do. And nowadays, there's a lot more functionality and flexibility where you can set your retention, what they call retention policies, where it's just like your files and folders that you might have, hard copies that you have in your business. You may have a retention policy that says, okay, we're going to keep this information for X amount of time, and then after that, we don't really need it, so we can get rid of it, right? And it ties into security as well, right? So all of these things are tied in together, which again, having someone who can actually help you through this process is very vital, because if you don't know about it yourself, because
Right.
it's a lot to keep in mind. I like to say, there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and not just say, okay, well, I got it and it's there.
Well,
So
that gives me an opportunity to tell everybody, if you need to get your technology right, definitely get in contact with the Maestro Silver Lining Consultant LLC. I give you all the testimonials you want, or if you want to contact Private Money Syndicate at privatemoneysyndicate.com to set up a consultation. We'll make sure that we route you to him. But I got another question. All right, so now here's my
shoot.
situation. I've got 3 computers here at the office. I've got one at home, and I've got documents stored on some that aren't on the other, and so how do I fix that? What's your suggestion for, being able to access anything from anywhere, or ultimately to get everything in one place so that I could talk to me?
Perfect. Great question. So that's another place where cloud computing shines, right? Because it centralizes all of your information. So if you have an account, which you do, of course, with us, if you have an account and you can connect all of your computers to that, right? Which you can upload all of the vital information that you need for your business to one central location. That will free it up on your physical computers if you don't need it on the physical computer until you need it on the physical computer, which will allow you to clear up some space, which actually helps with your performance on your hardware computer. And so when you do that, it lives in this centralized place. And then wherever you need it, you can access it. Even your phone, we a lot of people, use their phone in this exact fashion. I know I do. I upload stuff, and I may create something, and I save it in my cloud storage, so that when I get home or whatever the case may be, whether it's a video or whether it's pictures or whatever, I can download it to my computer or my desktop and do some editing, right? And then push it back up there, and then when I go back out, I may want to post something, and so you can create these processes, and organize all of your information very easily, just by doing it, because and it will follow the same convention of you doing it on your computer, but it would just live in the cloud. So,
and as you were talking about that, I was thinking about my jerry rig bootleg way of doing stuff. I would attach stuff to emails,
right,
and then I'll go back and search the emails,
right,
whatever device I was on, so I could download it. But there's a cloud now. They've got these other things like Dropbox and OneDrive and some of these tools,
Google Drive. And one thing I like about one thing I like about that is, now they have it where you actually can keep your information organized. Like, say for instance, I have several workspaces. Like, say for instance, for you, like something may pertain to you, I can keep it in that workspace separate from my other drive information and share that workspace with you, right? We got a couple of documents that we share, using that method, that formula. And so therefore, from a security standpoint, nobody else can access it, but me and you. But at the same time, it's easily accessible for me. So when I need to find it, and you send me a text, say, hey, tell me what's going on with the 10,000 Dreams Challenge, right? and I could just go straight to my workspace, and I don't have to go, like you was just saying, like I don't have to go in and start searching through to try to find anything, So it gives you a very organized way to maintain your data, to make sure that it's easily accessible, and secure, and on that higher level, right? Because you got that with the regular personal accounts from any one of those places, but you don't have that full functionality where you can do those extra things that are really catered to businesses. So once and that's what we're talking about, people who start their home-based businesses. So when you do that, you definitely want to, and we can help you with that as well. So definitely reach out. You definitely want to make sure that you get the business class, because a lot of people, I know their worry is that their data or their information is being whatever, and so when you pay for that service, it puts you in a different class of customer. They can no longer, when it's free, you're pretty much giving them permission to do these things by taking the service for free, as they say, right? In business, Tony, there's no such thing as free lunch.
Exactly.
You think you're getting it for free, but you're actually not getting it for free.
You just don't know how you're paying for it.
Exactly. You just don't know how you're paying for it. So, right. Which goes back to understanding the technology. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Got a few more. And like I say, we got to squeeze these in. All right. Now, tell everybody what a virtual private network, or VPN, because again, we see these advertised. Norton's one example, VPN. What is that? Who needs it? The advantages of it, so on and so forth.
Great question.
Probably the best way to describe it.
Great question. When I do my vulnerability assessments, that's one of the factors that we look at. Because again, every business, every business needs a VPN. There is no business that really doesn't need that.
But what is a VPN?
Right. So, and the reason for that is because a VPN is a virtual private network, right? So it creates, what it does is it masks your IP address. So it makes it hard for anyone, even those browser, trackers that people put on there to get your information, right? It blocks your IP address, so they don't know where it's coming from, right? So they can't. And it's kind of technical, but what that means is they don't have your address, right?
Okay.
So they don't have your address, so they can't find where you are, right? So it makes it a lot harder for networked based attacks. That's really that. So if you got your security software helping you with with your normal security of your machine, the VPN actually helps you on the network side, right? And there's other things that you can do as well. And again, I just really encourage you to reach out so that you can get a consultation and a vulnerability assessment that will help you, because I mean it's amazing what people can do, and so, depending on exactly what you're doing and how you connect to the internet, you may even need some hardware that actually has stuff like that built into it. So, there's software VPNs and you got hardware VPNs that actually have the software built into it, and it helps manage all of those things, so that you don't have to kind of, sit there and tweak it and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
But those things are as you scale, the more people you have, the more need for something like that. You may be fine with the software VPN, just initially if it's just you, and then as you grow, you definitely want to start looking into the other factors of that.
Okay. Well, it's been a while since we acknowledged any new viewers or see if there's any questions, because I got 3 more I want to get in before time runs out. So anybody else tuned in since we last did the acknowledgments, or any questions from the viewing audience?
Yeah, so Charles Boy is joining us. He says, "Good morning and blessings, Private Money Syndicate crew. I made it back. Welcome back, brother. Welcome back." Yeah, and he comes back in and says, "Hey, this is great information. I also use an app called Dropbox to pull information from my computer to my cell phones." Right. There's a lot of them out there, and again, you have different levels to it. So, depending on what you're trying to do, you definitely want to make sure that you consider all your options. So,
yeah. All right. Another question is, and I think this is the right term, environment. I think we work in a Google environment in terms of here at the Private Money Syndicate. So, what are the help people to understand because again, Google Chrome, but you've got all these other like functionalities. You open up a little box, you got all the little icons in there, but what are the obviously you have a preference and why, but for people to recognize that, having the right technology environment for you to be able to operate in, for your communications, for your data storage, for your functional operational uses, like you said, video editing might be one. Really understand how all these things integrate. What kind of considerations should they take into account when making those choices, instead of just kind of defaulting to, because most computers will have a default function, whereas they've got their reason for that. But what are the options people should be aware of, certain advantages or disadvantages of?
Yeah, man. And again, these are very lengthy conversations that I typically have with my
5 minutes,
right? That I have with my
give a teaser if nothing else. Why they need
right.
to call private
that I have
the Silver Lining Consulting, the Maestro.
Yeah, that I have with my consulting clients, right? And just to summarize all of this, it really goes based off of your needs, the business needs. So let's just say, for instance, you use Microsoft, you use Excel, you use PowerPoint, you use any of the Microsoft Office suite software, then that would say that you would need to stay within that stack, just because the functionality is going to work a lot better, and it's always better to have everything consolidated as much as possible, instead of having to go through multiple third-party vendors. Again, you only really want to do that if it's necessary. Otherwise you definitely want to try to stay in the same ecosystem. And again, when you're looking at it, you're really just looking at it from a user perspective. Like what are my, like say for instance, so if it's just you for your business, then you kind of determine, do I like to use do I like to use Office products, or do I like to use, Google products, and I'm a
Apple folks out there, Apple products.
right, and I'm a partner with Microsoft and Google, so I mean, either one we can help you with. It doesn't really matter, but they have their distinct advantages when it comes to certain spaces. Like Microsoft is a lot more in the government spaces, right? They have been for years, Google is heavy in the educational spaces, right? So depending on, so in other words, what that means is those programs have been geared towards certain verticals because that has been their customer. So they had the most impact on those software vendors, right? So they kind of make it like we talked about before. I think it was Italy, used Google during the pandemic, when the pandemic started, to facilitate remote learning for all of their schools in the entire country. Right. So just think about the power of being able to mobilize effort like that, in such a short span of time. Right. That's the power of what we're talking about, this technology. You have that ability, of course. And if I remember correctly, they had to pull some people from other teams to help accomplish that, right? Because that's a tremendous feat to accomplish, but they accomplished it, right? And that's really what you want to look at. You want to talk to somebody who has the technical know-how, to do these things for you, and then that way, you can do it a lot faster. Because if Italy tried to do it themselves, it would have took a whole lot longer for them to do that, But those are those same productivity suite, that we're talking about. It's the same exact thing. So, depending on, what your angle is. And again, that would be a conversation because there are specific differences. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And the last question, and here you will, as much as time allows, this guy, the Maestro, as I affectionately call him, is our chief. He's our virtual chief technology officer. Now he's here in Columbus. He was actually in the office last Saturday. Very seldom do we physically, very seldom we're in the same place at the same time. So the point is that everybody who watches this now live or later on Facebook or YouTube, this guy can be supporting you just like he supported the private money syndicate. I mean, we have evolved in the past 2 years phenomenally. And so, like I say, if you need a recommendation or let me tell you the story, just contact me. Go to privatemoneysyndicate.com. But okay, your slogan for Silver Lining Consulting is your IT department. So please, tell everybody why they need to have an IT department, why they need to engage you at Silver Lining Consulting LLC.
Yeah, it's a great summary. And it's really to help you navigate this vast world of information that we live in. There's so much information. There's so much that that's pertinent to your business, but it's hard to tell because it may be something that you're not really proficient in at this moment, right? And so as you grow into your business, you want somebody who's going to be able to foresee, not just see what's happening right now, but be able to foresee where you want to go based on your vision. Not just, it's not really about what I want for you. It's about what you need and about what your vision requires, right? So that's what we explore. That's where we go into when we go into our consultations is, we look into the future to see, okay, so eventually you want to get to this place and this is the steps that you need to take to get there, right? So having somebody who can actually use that expertise to help you in that right, and to help you to reach those levels of, some of your major competitors out there, is invaluable. You definitely, it'll help you stay ahead of the curve instead of, kind of following behind the curve,
Or just wandering, not really knowing where the curve is.
Right, right.
And so let me insert some. I like, for example, yeah, and I'm just giving you guys some things that you can tangibly connect with in terms of conversations that I have with him as our chief technology officer for the private money syndicate. Like we just talked about security. He talked about security very early on. Helped me realize our vulnerabilities and getting the right security suite to protect against those. Developing our website from what I had done on my own to, you go to privatemoneysyndicate.com. I say that's the showroom model, but then we're talking about things to enhance. One of those is migrating to the video vault page being actually just links to YouTube, as we're now putting the videos and everything on YouTube. Even though we produce on Facebook, that's a searchable platform. You can't really search on Facebook, but that's what people go to YouTube for, and that is part of Google's environment. So these are things I probably sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'm mimicking. I'm out in the words that he gave me. Okay. But here's the point: when you get involved with somebody who's smart about these things, you too become smart. It
Right.
becomes very tangible. Another
It's
thing
contagious. It's contagious.
contagious, exactly, is picking out hardware. Like if you're because you can't see what I've got here. I've got my microphone and all these other things, but we're talking about the difference between having a digital camera versus having a laptop for doing live and things like that, software and apps to where you can broadcast if you want to do podcast or Facebook Live, or they've got software or apps. I guess I don't know which one is which, but they do the same kind of things where you can actually simulcast on all those. But again, you will move slow and maybe go down the wrong paths if you don't have somebody smart like him to get you on the right path, which helps you be more cost effective in accomplishing your desired outcomes and capacity. So as you watch this now and in the future, Silver Lining Consulting LLC, he's a great guy. I mean, it's not like you're gonna be talking to somebody who's talking over your head and you feel just as helpless as you did before you called him. One of the things I love about Milt is I understand him. He really takes time to break it down to, me. And I'm sure he does as well with everybody else. But, it starts off with the questions, the consultation. So I encourage everybody, even if you're thinking of going into business, upgrading what you got this year, going into next year, those kind of things, you would do yourself right. You would do yourself justice to schedule a consultation with the Maestro, Silver Lining LLC. So, man, I appreciate you and I love you. I just got to share the love. I'm just telling y'all, he's a gift from above as far as technology is concerned. So, well, Maestro, you've done a great job answering those. Is there anything else? We got about 5 minutes left that you want to, put on the table for discussion as far as the technology stuff, and I'll let you have that time.
Yeah, and we talked about the home based business and the people who are the entrepreneurs, the startuppreneurs that are just getting into it, right? But definitely, if you have a business and you have infrastructure already, it's always good to have a second eye to come in to look at that. As I said before, we do security vulnerability assessments that can help you identify some places that you may or may not be vulnerable in. And I really want to emphasize that because, again, as we all move into the next phases of our success and we're pushing to get our businesses out there, we can't lose sight of that. We can't lose sight of that because those, and I'm going to read what the brother Charles Bowie said, because it's absolutely correct. Anybody who has been hacked on simple things like Facebook or Instagram knows it's important to have the best of security measures in place, especially for business affairs. I got you locked in, Milt Walker, when I want my website set up. Thanks for the information. And that's another thing, we actually provide protection for websites, servers, if you have servers, any virtual PCs that you may have. There's so much that we can do for you that again, having a great conversation with us, will really expose you to some new information, and it may save you some money. It'll definitely save you some money in the long run, but it may save you some money right now. So you definitely want to make sure you do that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we've had we got it all in. It took
We
two
got it in
episodes,
today.
but we got it all in. But that's not all. So to get the rest of the story, as was a guy Paul Harvey would say, for those of you old enough to remember who that is, schedule a consultation. You're wrapping up 2021. Have your plans and everything. See, if you're planning for 2022, you need to have the right resources. You need to have the right information to start looking at, what you're going to accomplish over the next 12 months as we go into a whole new year. But even if you watch this somewhere in the future, is 2024, this is still the guy, right? Because technology will continue to evolve. This is never ending. It's kind of like if you want to stay healthy, you got to eat constantly, eat the right foods. I'm just blessed. We're all blessed here at the Private Money Syndicate to have you as part of the team for all that you do for us. And as I say to everyone, if you're going to go in business and stay in business, you got to mind your business. So, hey, Maestro, thank you so much. And I'll let you take us on home.
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate all the support, and it's amazing to me that I'm able to work with such giants in these industries that help me to grow in my business. There's going to be a lot of great things coming up for everyone here soon, and I'm really excited about that, and I really want to share it with as many people as I can. I was thinking the other day about the analogy of saying, Noah's Ark, saying, hey, just we're building this ark. We're like, hey, everybody, come on, let's go. We can all go. Come on. So I really want as many people to come as possible. I really do. And, I really hope that people know that that they're worthy of it, and that they can come and they can actually have an impact on the world as well. So thank you again, Tony. Thank you all for supporting. And as always, we'll see you on the next one. All right. Y'all take care. Peace.